Good morning. Today we begin the book of First Kings, and First and Second Kings are more of the history of the Israelites in the Promised Land. In Samuel, we had King Saul and King David, and the conquest of the Promised Lands. In these two books of Kings, First and Second, David is nearing his death as we begin First Kings. And as we get to the end of Second Kings, we will find the Israelites in exile. They have been conquered and just terrible things. But anyway, it's continuing the saga of the Israelites as they live in the Promised Land, and nothing is a bed of roses for them. Chapter 1 begins with King David, old and advanced in years, and it says, although they covered him in blankets, he couldn't get warm. And so they went to search for a young, beautiful woman to snuggle up to him, to keep him warm. And of course, that really didn't do the complete thing either for him. But within all of that time with King David's health failing, his oldest living son, Adonijah, decided, I will be king. And so he called Joab, the commander of the army, and he called a few of the other ranking officials of the day, and tried to set himself up as king. And David had promised to Bathsheba that her son Solomon would be king after him. And but in all of this going on, Adonijah had as I said, taken Joab, the priest, or the commander of the army, and Zadok, the priest, and Benaiah, who was kind of in charge of a lot of stuff within the Israelite nation, and had them be a part of his sacrifice and all of this installation as king. And David didn't know anything about it. Bathsheba found out about it and requests to be able to come to talk to David. And I think that's just, you got a request to go talk to your husband? And that's not right at all. But anyway, that's, it's just the way it was, I suppose. But she comes to David and tells him that your son Adonijah has gone and had himself installed as king. And, you're still king, really. But you remember that you had promised that Solomon would be king. And so it's evident that, it wasn't mandated that the oldest son would be king. And it's just, David was the youngest son, the ruddy one that everybody kind of counted out, that God selected over all of Jesse's other sons, to be king. And so David calls Solomon and he does get established then as king. And verse 28 of chapter 1, King David answers, summon Bathsheba to me. So she came. And the king swore, as long as the Lord lives who saved me, your son Solomon will be king of Israel. So he summons the priest Zadok and the prophet Nathan and Benaiah and these supporting people, the ones that should be there. And because the prophet Nathan wasn't a part of Adonijah's installation that way. But they say, have Solomon ride on my own mule and bring him to Gihon, and let the priest Zadok and the prophet Nathan anoint him as king over Israel. And then blow the trumpet and announce, long live King Solomon, king of Israel. And so they do that. And so now Solomon is anointed king, and also Adonijah has anointed himself or installed himself, whichever you want to use, as king. And but with all of this that's going on, verse 41, Adonijah and all the guests who were with him heard that Solomon had been installed as king. And when Joab heard this, he cried. He wondered, well, what's going on? Why is all this happening? And then they're told that King David has installed King Solomon as as king. And of course that puts fear within them. And verse 49, all the guests of Adonijah got up with trembling and went their own ways. And Adonijah, fearing Solomon, got up and went to grasp the horns of the altar. So he went, and I don't remember the symbolism of that, but Solomon was informed that Adonijah was afraid of him. And his, Adonijah's request is, well, let King Solomon promise not to kill, me with the sword. And he says, if he proves to be a worthy man and a loyal servant, a loyal citizen, nothing will happen to him. And chapter 2 begins with David's death. When David's time drew near to die, he called Solomon, and he said, it's my time to die. And he says, be strong, be courageous, and keep charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways, keeping his statutes, keeping his commandments, and, following his ordinances and his testimonies. So the last advice from King David to King Solomon is be faithful to God. Remember who God is, and remember that you are a servant of God. And he says that the Lord will then establish his word that he spoke concerning, and then there's instructions, for Joab, who had, kind of turned against, anyway had supported Adonijah rather than, seeking out what the King David would have. But, there's just not a smooth, peaceful transition of power. I mean, it's just kind of the way it is. Everybody wants the power and the prestige, it comes, and Joab, he's pleading for his life as well, and then David talks about Joab, but he also talks about this Shimei, the guy that threw the rocks at him and cursed him and all of that. And it's, it says that, he tells Shimei that, you will live if you stay within Jerusalem, if you don't leave, and this is part of what Solomon is staying with this, this is David's words to Solomon, is to, make this guy, this is where he can be and no place else. And, so we get a hint of, something's going to happen there too. And it does, but verse 10 of chapter 2, David sleeps with his ancestors. That means he dies, very gentle way of saying it. He slept with his ancestors. And I think about that too, to go to sleep at night and to die during your sleep. I mean, what a peaceful way to die. And it's one of those, it's kind of the hope of a lot of people, but, it doesn't always happen that way. But, it says that David reigned for 40 years, 7 years just in Judah and 33 years over the United Kingdom of Israel. And in verse 13, after David's death, Adonijah comes to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and she asks, do you come peacefully? Yes, he says, I do. And he says to her, the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel expected me to reign. However, the kingdom has turned about and become my brother's, for it was from the Lord. So now I have a request, So here, the older brother Adonijah, a son of a different mother, and Bathsheba is not his mother, but he comes to her, Solomon's mother, to ask for her interference or help that way. And he says to her, please ask King Solomon, he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag, the Shunammite, for my wife. And this is the woman that had been selected to try to warn King David as he was dying, and so, we're told that Abinadab was a young, handsome man, and this Abishag was a beautiful young woman, and, so, he wanted her as his wife, and she says, I will speak to the king on your behalf. So she does. And she goes and says, I have one small request. Do not refuse me, and it's, don't say no. And, that's we want to ask a question, and we kind of like to say, don't say no, but and you know, she asks a question, and he asks, well, why do you ask that? Ask for the kingdom as well. He's my elder brother. But, you know, ask not only for him, but, you know, and so he says he has devised this scheme against me. I mean, he understands what's going on, that, you know, and we end up with the death of Adonijah, and just the transition, as I said, the transition from King David to King Solomon, with Adonijah trying to get in there and everything. You know, it's not a peaceful transition. And so Adonijah ends up being killed, and Joab as well, who had been the commander of the army. So by the time we get to the end of these first two chapters, Solomon is king, and it says the kingdom was established in the land of Solomon. And, you know, but there wasn't, as I said, it wasn't just